The Vorthak mothership hung like a metallic cancer above Earth's dying atmosphere, its shadow stretching across continents. Captain Zektar flexed his 6 clawed appendages as he surveyed the conquered planet through the observation deck's crystalline viewport. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for amusement among his species. "Look how they scatter," he hissed to his lieutenant, pointing at the burning cities below. "These humans are even weaker than the intelligence report suggested." The bridge of the massive warship buzzed with activity as hundreds of Vorthak warriors coordinated the systematic destruction of Earth's major population centers. Their technology was millennia ahead of anything humanity had developed. Plasma cannons that could level mountains, energy shields that made their ships virtually invulnerable, and matter disintegrators that could erase entire city blocks in seconds. Lieutenant Kresheva approached, his scales gleaming under the harsh artificial lighting. "Captain, we've captured several thousand humans for the labor camps. Most offer no resistance whatsoever. They simply give up." Zektar's throat sacs inflated with satisfaction. "Pathetic. No wonder they never made it beyond their own solar system. Their greatest warriors fall before a single squad of our soldiers." The Vorthak had conquered 17 star systems in the past century. Each species they encountered eventually submitted to their superior firepower and tactical prowess. Some fought longer than others, but all eventually broke. Humans, it seemed, were breaking faster than most. On the surface of Earth, in the ruins of what had once been downtown Chicago, 8-year-old Maya Chen huddled in the basement of a collapsed apartment building with her grandmother. The old woman held the child close, whispering prayers in Mandarin while explosions echoed overhead. Maya's parents had been killed in the first wave of attacks 3 days ago. Her grandmother had managed to pull her from their burning home and guide her through the chaos to this temporary shelter. Around them, dozens of other survivors shared the cramped space. Families with young children, elderly couples, teenagers who had been separated from their parents in the panic. The little girl pressed her face against her grandmother's shoulder, trying to block out the sounds of screaming and the acrid smell of smoke that seemed to seep through every crack in their hiding place. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and her throat was raw from the dusty air. "Nai-Nai," she whispered, using the Chinese word for grandmother. "When will the monsters go away?" Her grandmother's weathered hands stroked Maya's black hair. "Soon, little star. Soon someone will come to help us." Above them, the concrete ceiling shuddered as another Vorthak patrol ship passed overhead, its scanning beams searching for signs of human life. The alien invaders had been systematically hunting down survivors, either killing them outright or dragging them away to massive processing centers. Back on the mothership, Zektar reviewed casualty reports with growing satisfaction. Human military resistance had crumbled within 48 hours of the initial invasion. Their primitive nuclear weapons had been neutralized before they could be deployed. Their air forces swatted from the sky like insects, their ground troops overwhelmed by superior alien technology. "Captain," Communications Officer Thekran announced from his station, "we're receiving surrender transmissions from several human governments. The European Union, what remains of the United States government, and the Asian coalition are all requesting terms." "Terms?" Zektar's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "Tell them they have no position to negotiate. Complete surrender or complete annihilation. Those are their only options." The Vorthak military machine was a thing of terrible efficiency. They had developed their warfare tactics through centuries of conquest, refining their methods with each species they subjugated. Standard procedure called for a devastating initial assault to break the enemy's will to fight, followed by systematic resource extraction and population control. Commander Velnash, Zektar's second-in-command, materialized beside him with the silent grace that made Vorthak such effective predators. "Sir, we're detecting some unusual energy signatures from the outer system. Our long-range sensors are picking up what might be artificial constructs near the gas giant these humans call Jupiter. Zektar's attention sharpened. Artificial constructs? What kind? Unknown, Captain. The signatures don't match any known human technology. They appear to be moving, accelerating toward the inner system. For the first time since the invasion began, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Zektar's features. The Vorthak intelligence network was extensive, spanning dozens of star systems. They had been monitoring human civilization for decades before launching their attack, cataloging every weapon, every ship, every technological capability. There had been no mention of any human presence beyond their home planet. "Continue monitoring," he ordered, "and increase patrols around the perimeter of the system. I want to know what those constructs are the moment they come into clearer sensor range." Meanwhile, in the basement shelter, Maya had stopped crying. She sat perfectly still in her grandmother's arms, her young mind processing something that the adults around her couldn't perceive. The child had always been sensitive, able to sense things that others missed. Her parents had often joked that she had an invisible friend who told her about things happening far away. But this wasn't her imagination. This was something real, something vast and powerful moving through the darkness of space. She could feel it the way she could feel her own heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing moment. "Nai Nai," she whispered again. But this time her voice held something different. Not fear or desperation, but a strange sort of anticipation. "He's coming." Her grandmother looked down at the child with concern. "Who's coming, little star?" Maya's dark eyes reflected an inner knowledge that seemed far too old for her years. "The one who's been sleeping, the one who's been waiting. He heard us calling." The old woman felt a chill run down her spine. Maya had always been an unusual child, prone to saying things that didn't quite make sense but somehow felt important. During the invasion, as their world collapsed around them, the little girl had remained oddly calm. As if she knew something the adults didn't. On the Vorthak mothership, the mysterious energy signatures were growing stronger and more distinct. Long-range sensors were now detecting not one, but dozens of objects moving through the outer system at impossible speeds. Their acceleration curves defied known physics, and their energy outputs were unlike anything in Vorthak databases. "Captain," Velnash reported, his usual confidence wavering slightly, "the objects are changing course. They appear to be responding to our presence." Zektar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The blips representing the unknown contacts were moving in perfect formation, adjusting their trajectories with a precision that suggested advanced artificial intelligence or highly coordinated organic control. "Sir, we are also detecting some kind of transmission being broadcast from the objects," Thekron added. "It's not directed at us specifically, but it's spreading across multiple frequencies and quantum channels." "What kind of transmission?" "Unknown, Captain. The signal pattern doesn't match any known communication protocol. It's almost like they're announcing their presence." In the ruins below, other children in other shelters across the globe were experiencing the same inexplicable sensation that Maya felt. A 5-year-old boy in the rubble of London whispered to his mother about the Guardian coming home. A 7-year-old girl in the remains of Tokyo told her father that the sleeping giant was waking up. Children who had never met, who spoke different languages and came from different cultures, were all somehow aware of the same approaching presence. Maya pressed her small hand against the concrete wall of their shelter, as if trying to feel vibrations through the earth itself. Her grandmother watched in growing amazement as the child's expression changed from the hollow-eyed look of a trauma victim to something approaching wonder. "He's been gone so long," Maya said, her voice carrying across the cramped basement and causing other survivors to turn their attention toward her. "But he never really left. He was just sleeping, waiting for us to need him. An elderly man nearby scoffed. Child's in shock, making up stories to cope with what's happening. But Maya's grandmother, who had lived through decades of human history and learned to trust her instincts about such things, felt something stirring in her chest. Hope, perhaps. Or recognition of something she couldn't quite name. The Vorthak had conquered 17 star systems, but they had never encountered anything like what was moving toward Earth through the cold depths of space. Their sensors continued to track the approaching objects, now numbering in the hundreds, each one larger and more powerful than anything in their vast military arsenal. Captain Zektar stood before the main tactical display, his predatory confidence beginning to crack as he realized that their intelligence about this system had been catastrophically incomplete. The humans they had been slaughtering weren't alone after all. Something vast and patient and utterly alien was coming home to defend them, and it was almost within weapons range. The first contact with the unknown objects came 12 hours after they had been detected. Captain Zektar stood rigid on the bridge of his mothership as his sensor operators struggled to make sense of the readings flooding their instruments. "Captain, the lead object is... It's impossible," stammered Sensor Chief Graktul, his usually steady voice cracking. "It's larger than our entire fleet combined. The energy signatures are off every scale we have." Through the massive viewport, they could now see it with the naked eye. A vast geometric form that seemed to bend light around itself, moving through space with the inexorable patience of a living mountain. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, its surface covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Thekran announced, his claws trembling over his control panel. "It's directed specifically at us, and it's in our language." "Impossible. Humans don't know our language." "The transmission isn't coming from the planet, Captain. It's coming from the lead object." Zektar felt his throat sacs contract with fear for the first time in decades. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything the Vorthak had ever heard. It spoke their language perfectly, but the tone carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal hearing. Ancient beyond measure, patient as stone, and utterly, completely alien. "Children of the Vorthak nation," the voice said, each word causing the ship's hull to vibrate sympathetically. "You have made an error in judgment. You have attacked a protected species under the guardianship of the architects. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your actions." Zektar's mind raced. The architects were legends, myths spoken of in the oldest Vorthak texts. Supposedly an ancient race that had vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago, leaving behind only ruins and stories. They were said to have seeded worlds and guided the development of younger species before disappearing into the void. "This is Captain Zektar of the Vorthak Imperial Fleet," he transmitted back, forcing authority into his voice. "We claim this system by right of conquest. These humans are a primitive species with no galactic standing. Withdraw, or we will consider your interference an act of war." The response came not in words, but in action. The massive architect ship simply existed in one position, then existed in another, having traveled several million kilometers in the span between one sensor sweep and the next. It now hung directly above the Vorthak mothership, its vast shadow blotting out the stars. "You misunderstand," the voice continued, now carrying an undertone that made every Vorthak on the bridge instinctively bare their claws in response to a perceived threat. "Humanity is not primitive. They are children, our children, and you have hurt them." Down on Earth's surface, Maya Chen had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep for the first time since the invasion began. Her grandmother watched over her, marveling at the change in the child's demeanor. The terror and shock that had haunted Maya's eyes for days had been replaced by an expression of absolute serenity. Other survivors in the basement shelter had begun to notice it too. Children throughout the building had stopped crying, as if some invisible comfort had settled over them. Adults whispered among themselves, wondering if it was the calm before another storm of violence. But Maya knew better. In her dreams, she was walking through vast corridors of living metal, past walls that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. Massive entities moved through these spaces, beings of such complexity and beauty that her young mind could only perceive them as shifting patterns of light and thought. They spoke to her without words, their communication flowing directly into her consciousness like warm honey. They showed her images of Earth's history that no human had ever seen. The first stirring of life in ancient oceans, the development of intelligence in early hominids, the gradual guidance and protection that had shaped human evolution across millions of years. The architects had been watching humanity's development since the species had first learned to make fire. They had prevented asteroid impacts that would have caused extinction, subtly influenced the development of human technology and culture, and waited patiently for the day when their young charges would be ready to take their place among the galactic community. But humanity wasn't ready yet. They were still too young, too vulnerable, too prone to destroying themselves and others. So the architects had continued their vigil from the outer darkness, building vast machines and constructs in the cold spaces between planets, preparing for the day when their protection would be needed. That day had come. In space, above Earth, more architect vessels were materializing out of the quantum foam that existed between dimensions. Each one was unique, a masterwork of technology so advanced that it seemed more like art than engineering. Some resembled vast flowers with petals made of crystallized energy. Others looked like living creatures, their surfaces rippling with organic movement, despite being constructed from materials that human science had no names for. Captain Zektar watched his tactical display with growing horror as hundreds of these impossible ships took up positions throughout the Earth system. His fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours ago, was now utterly outclassed and outnumbered. "Sir," Lieutenant Kreshova whispered, "our weapon systems they're not responding. Something is interfering with our control networks. External attack?" "No, Captain. It's as if our own systems are refusing to function. The targeting computers keep displaying error messages, but our technicians can't find any faults in the hardware." Zektar's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. The architects weren't just preventing his ships from attacking them. They were somehow communicating directly with Vorthak technology, convincing their machines to refuse orders that would result in violence against the protected species below. "This is impossible," he snarled. "Our systems are hardened against any form of external control." Commander Velnash approached cautiously. "Captain, perhaps we should consider the possibility that these architects have access to technology we simply cannot comprehend. Our databases contain references to species that disappeared from the galaxy long before the Vorthak achieved spaceflight. If these are the same entities, you're suggesting we surrender to myths and legends?" "I'm suggesting we face reality, sir. Look around you." Zektar turned his attention back to the tactical display, where the impossible was becoming undeniably real. Architect vessels had positioned themselves between every Vorthak ship and the planet below. But they weren't attacking or threatening. They were simply waiting. The lead architect ship transmitted again, and this time the voice carried an undertone of infinite sadness. "You have caused unnecessary suffering to beings under our protection. This cannot be allowed to continue. You will withdraw your forces and depart this system immediately. And if we refuse? Then you will learn why entire civilizations once spoke our name in whispers." In the basement shelter, Maya stirred in her sleep and spoke in a voice that seemed far too old for her years. "They're not angry," she said, her eyes still closed. "They're just disappointed." Like when you hurt someone smaller than you and your parents find out. Her grandmother leaned closer. Who's not angry, little star? The ones who made us. The ones who've been watching over us all this time. Maya's eyes opened, and they seemed to hold depths that no 8-year-old should possess. They're going to make the monsters go away now. Around the globe, similar scenes were playing out. Children in bomb shelters and refugee camps were speaking of guardians and protectors, of ancient watchers who had finally emerged from the shadows to defend their charges. Adults dismissed these words as trauma-induced fantasies, but the children knew better. They could feel the vast presence of the architects settling over Earth like a protective blanket, and for the first time since the invasion began, they felt safe. Meanwhile, the Vorthak fleet found itself in an impossible position. Their weapons would not fire, their engines would barely respond to commands, and their communication systems kept receiving transmissions from Home Fleet Command ordering them to withdraw immediately. But those orders were impossible. They had been cut off from contact with Vorthak space since entering the Earth system. Captain Zektar realized that the architects weren't just technologically superior to his species, they were operating on a completely different level of existence, manipulating space and time and information in ways that made conventional military tactics meaningless. "Captain," Thekran announced, his voice hollow with defeat, "we're receiving new transmissions from the architect vessels. They're showing us things." "What things?" "Historical records, sir. Images of what happened to other species that attacked architect protectorates." On the main display, holographic images began to form. The crew of the Vorthak mothership watched in stunned silence as they saw the fate of civilizations that had made the same mistake they were making now. Entire star-spanning empires reduced to scattered refugees. Their military might dissolved as if it had never existed, their warriors left to contemplate their actions in exile among the distant stars. The architects did not destroy their enemies. That would have been crude and unnecessarily violent. Instead, they simply removed them, transported them to distant parts of the galaxy where they could no longer threaten innocent species, gave them barren worlds where they could reflect on their actions, and hopefully learn to be better than they had been. "They're offering us a choice," Velnash said quietly. "Leave voluntarily and retain our dignity, or be removed forcibly and scattered across the void." Zektar stared at the images of mighty Vorthak warships being gently but irresistibly moved through space by invisible forces, their crews helpless to resist. His pride as a warrior warred with his responsibility to the soldiers under his command. In her basement shelter, Maya opened her eyes fully and sat up, causing her grandmother to stir from her own exhausted doze. "They're leaving," the child announced with absolute certainty. "The monsters are going away." Above them, the sounds of Vorthak patrol ships had indeed stopped. The alien scanners that had been systematically hunting for survivors fell silent. Across the globe, the machinery of invasion ground to a halt as an entire starfaring civilization found itself gently but firmly escorted out of human space by guardians older than memory. The evacuation of the Vorthak fleet was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Captain Zektar watched through his viewport as his mighty warships were lifted and moved through space by forces he couldn't even begin to understand. There was no violence, no destruction of property, no harm done to any of his crew members. The architects simply relocated them. His mothership, along with the hundreds of vessels that made up the invasion force, found itself transported to the edge of the solar system in the span of a few heartbeats. The technology required for such a feat was beyond comprehension. The Vorthak had mastered faster-than-light travel, but this was something else entirely. This was manipulation of space-time itself on a scale that suggested the architects viewed physical laws as suggestions rather than absolute truths. "Captain," Communications Officer Thekron reported, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and relief, "we're receiving final transmissions from the architect vessels." The same impossible voice that had first contacted them filled the bridge one last time. But now it carried a different tone, one of patient instruction rather than warning. "Children of the Vorthak Nation, you have learned an important lesson today. Strength is not measured by the ability to destroy the innocent, but by the wisdom to protect them. Your species has great potential, but you must choose a different path if you wish to earn your place among the civilized races of this galaxy." The transmission included star charts showing a distant cluster of uninhabited systems on the far side of Vorthak space, worlds rich in resources but empty of sentient life. "These worlds are yours to develop and inhabit. Use them to build something better than what you have created before. When you have learned to live in peace with one another, perhaps we will speak again." Captain Zektar found himself responding to a being that his species had never imagined could exist. "Why spare us? We came here to conquer and destroy. By your own logic, we deserve whatever punishment you choose to inflict." "Because," the voice replied, and now it carried overtones of something that might have been affection, "you are children too, older and more dangerous than humanity, but still learning, still growing, still capable of becoming better than you are. Everyone deserves the chance to choose a different path." The massive architect vessels began to fade from sensors, not by moving away, but by shifting back into whatever dimension they had emerged from. Within moments, the Vorthak fleet found itself alone in deep space, their war plans in ruins, but their lives intact. Down on Earth's surface, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the ruins of Chicago. Maya Chen woke in her grandmother's arms to find that the basement shelter was filled with a soft golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Other survivors were stirring as well, children and adults alike emerging from the traumatic stupor that had gripped them since the invasion began. But something fundamental had changed. The air itself felt different, charged with possibilities that hadn't existed before. "Nai, Maya whispered, tugging at her grandmother's sleeve. "Look outside." The old woman helped the child climb the concrete steps that led to what had once been the building's ground floor. Where before there had been nothing but rubble and twisted metal, now there was something extraordinary. The architects had left gifts. Scattered throughout the ruins of human civilization were crystalline structures that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. Each one was roughly the size of a small building, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living artwork. As survivors approached these structures, they discovered that touching them produced the most remarkable effects. Wounds healed, illnesses disappeared, hunger and thirst vanished. But more than that, the crystals seemed to impart knowledge directly into the minds of those who made contact with them. Information about technology, about medicine, about agriculture and engineering, and 1,000 other subjects that humanity would need to rebuild their civilization. Maya placed her small hand against the nearest crystal and gasped as images flooded her consciousness. She saw Earth as it could be. Cities that grew rather than being built. Technology that worked in harmony with nature rather than against it. Humans spreading out among the stars not as conquerors, but as gardeners, helping to nurture and protect younger species as they themselves had been nurtured and protected. "They're teaching us," she breathed, her young voice filled with wonder. "They're showing us how to be better." Her grandmother touched the crystal as well, and found herself understanding medical techniques that surpassed anything human science had developed. Around them, other survivors were having similar revelations. engineers learned about clean energy sources that could power entire cities without pollution. Farmers discovered methods for growing food that would feed the world without depleting the soil. Teachers gained access to educational techniques that could unlock the potential in every human mind. But perhaps most importantly, everyone who touched the crystals came away with a deep, bone-deep understanding of their place in the universe. Humanity was not alone. They never had been. They were part of a vast community of intelligent species spread across the galaxy, all of them guided and protected by the ancient architects until they were ready to take their place as equals. The knowledge came with responsibility. Humans now understood that they were being prepared for a greater purpose, to become the protectors and guides for even younger species that would emerge in the future. The cycle would continue, with each generation helping the next to reach its potential. Around the world, similar scenes were playing out. The crystalline gifts appeared in every major population center, offering healing and knowledge to anyone who approached them with peaceful intentions. Those who came seeking power or ways to harm others found the crystals unresponsive, their surfaces becoming opaque and cold. Within days, human society began to transform in ways that would have seemed impossible just a week before. The knowledge imparted by the architect crystals allowed for technological advances that solved problems humanity had been struggling with for centuries. Clean energy, sustainable agriculture, medical techniques that could cure previously incurable diseases, transportation methods that caused no environmental damage. But the most profound changes were not technological. The contact with architect knowledge had given humanity a new perspective on their place in the universe. The petty conflicts and divisions that had plagued the species for millennia suddenly seemed incredibly small and pointless when viewed against the backdrop of galactic civilization. Maya Chen, now recognized as one of the first humans to make contact with architect consciousness, found herself at the center of a new movement. Children around the world who had experienced similar connections were gathering together, sharing their insights and helping to translate the vast knowledge contained within the crystals into forms that adults could understand and implement. The little girl who had once huddled in a basement shelter, terrified and alone, now stood before gatherings of world leaders and scientists, explaining concepts that her young mind somehow comprehended perfectly. "The architects didn't save us just to save us," she told a gathering of United Nations representatives who had assembled in the ruins of New York. "They saved us because we're supposed to save others. That's how it works. The older children help the younger children, and someday the younger children grow up and help the next ones." The Vorthak invasion had lasted less than a week, but it had changed humanity forever. Not through the destruction it had caused, but through the response it had provoked. The sleeping guardians had awakened, revealed themselves, and in doing so had shown their charges what they could become. Years passed. Human civilization rebuilt itself along the lines suggested by architect knowledge, creating a society that was more just, more sustainable, and more peaceful than anything that had existed before. The scars left by the invasion healed, but the memory remained as a reminder of how precious and fragile life could be. And in the depths of space, vast architect constructs continued their patient vigil, watching over dozens of young species as they took their first tentative steps toward joining the galactic community. They monitored the progress of former enemies like the Vorthak, who were slowly learning to build rather than destroy in their new systems. Maya Chen, now a young woman leading humanity's first diplomatic mission to contact other architect protectorates, stood on the bridge of Earth's most advanced starship as it approached a system where another young species was taking its first steps into space. "Remember," she told her crew as they prepared to make first contact with beings who had never imagined they were not alone in the universe, "we were children once too. We're here to help them grow, not to judge them for where they are now." In the depths of space, ancient watchers observed this interaction with satisfaction. The cycle continued, as it always had and always would. Children grew up to become guardians, protectors became teachers, and the galaxy slowly but surely became a more civilized and peaceful place. The monsters had mocked the little girl who claimed help was coming. But she had been right, and in being right, she had helped her entire species take the next step in their journey toward becoming something greater than they had ever imagined possible. The architects had kept their promise. They had protected their children when protection was needed, taught them when teaching was required, and now watched with pride as those children prepared to become protectors themselves. In the end, that was what true strength meant. Not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to nurture. Not the ability to conquer, but the desire to protect. And humanity, guided by the whispered promises of a little girl in a basement, had chosen to embrace that strength and make it their own.